Alright, so it's time to take this sketchbook way up there where there are some good views. I just hope the sketchbook doesn't melt by then. It's gotta be 40 degrees, which anywhere else in the world would not be warm. But here, it is roasting. So the nice thing about painting winter is that you kind of save some money on paint because basically everything is already white. Almost to the peak, then it's time to make a quick sketch before you have to zip back. Okay, so here I am right up at the top and I'm only gonna have a minute to make a sketch, so I've got to be pretty quick before we zip down. Okay, fresh book right here, and it is time for the first page. I've only got enough time to make a quick outline, so mostly what I just need to do is capture just a loose outline of this, and I'm actually just gonna make a few notes on the paper about what is there, and then I'm gonna paint it in later. But so long as I get it here, I can kind of get the inspiration, what I'm seeing, down on the page. And then here is the biggest part, is labeling in a few of the things that you notice out here that you might not pick up on a camera. I can't tell you how many times I've taken pictures thinking I'm gonna sketch them later, but the trick is you bring your sketchbook with you always. Just make sure it's durable enough to, you know, withstand life. And you always kind of make a little bit of a note of what your eye is picking up here, because you're never gonna see that in the picture again. So what I'm seeing is like these enormous kind of mud flats and just kind of the cool gray purple way, those all kind of fade together. It almost looks like a watercolor. And I'll just write down a few of the colors that I'm noticing and not rely on the camera. And then we'll be able to bring it to life when we head down. And now that I've got that, it's time to head right down quickly before we're late, and I'll fill in the sketch a bit later. Okay, so now that I'm back at home, it is time to actually paint this in. It seems kind of janky and everything, but like the memory of this place is still super fresh. So I'm gonna start with kind of painting the lightest to the darkest, starting with kind of where it says like light blue, and work my way into a few of these mountains. And we'll see if we can kind of bring this back to life, even though I wasn't able to sketch it up there. I'm just wetting these paints really quick. The sketchbook did survive, I'll have you know. I took a few falls. I am in less good shape than it is, but that's okay. I will heal. So I'm going to start with some of these light kind of blues up by where all that snow was. And even though I did write all of this in pen, it's kind of fun. I feel like it adds a little bit of a kind of interesting sketching element to kind of have some of those colors written in. And they will disappear pretty quick, honestly. They really just sort of vanish into the painting itself. Okay, so I'm just starting with a couple of those light blues. That's what makes that snow, that like real bright white snow pop so much. And then same here in the background. We've got our mountains kind of there in the background. Just a couple light blues here. Nothing too wild, but just enough. And I'm going to be working light to dark because watercolor is one of those just opaque mediums, so you can always go darker on top and it will kind of disappear, which works really well. Let's see, and then we have these kind of wild mountains up here, which are real kind of jagged, a couple little bits blue there. It starts really messy, but it gets cleaner. It's always those last few strokes that's going to bring it together. But it's the hardest one to start. That's the hardest one to actually make, is that first initial brush strokes. We're already past that, so we're doing great. Okay, so there's this. Still looks a little janky. but you'll see, it's going to come right to life in a pretty cool way. Next, I'm going to hit these kind of mud flat areas, and that's going to be a lot down here, pretty wet on wet, so I'm actually just going to throw a bunch of water down right now. It's a lot easier to do in the studio than in the field, although I like them both. In the field, I have to use a little bit of vodka instead of water to keep things from freezing, not inside. I'm going to start with a little bit of purple, which is not entirely what it looked like, but it felt those kind of purple, those sort of purple brown feels of that super wide mud flat. Turning an arm out there, just a little bit right there, and then a little bit over here. Still being super loose, super kind of flowy. Now I'll jump into some of those browns that were up there. This is painting a bit more of how it felt, not necessarily what I saw, but you could just see for miles and miles and miles, which is pretty wild looking. A couple of these brown segments right here, and then we'll finish it all off with a little bit of indigo. Real messy palette, but that's okay. A little bit of indigo right here, just kind of carving out the mountains, just like that. I just wrote down mud flat gray was my written instruction to myself. Sometimes the interpretation is part of the fun too, isn't it? All right, a little bit of that mud flat gray. I'm mostly letting the colors kind of mix themselves. You'll see I'm just kind of letting them touch, and then it's the mixing that they do on the page that often makes it look so cool. Just adding a little bit of brown here in some of those areas that need just a little bit more spice. And then once that's looking good, I'm gonna leave that well enough alone, which is the hardest part. It is just so difficult to actually put something down that you like and then stop painting. It's just the first half of the painting is to make it, and the second half it feels like it's made to ruin it. So my main struggle is just putting something down and leaving it alone. Okay, so with that, leaving that well enough alone, and now I'm going to, let's see, I forgot my little bit of blue down here. Oops, there we go. Never too late. Now it is almost time to add a little bit of the colors over here. So we've got some of these interesting trees, a couple of these instructions are written down here. But so we've got these interesting kind of trees, which are kind of this dark indigo, and they kind of work their way up right here. And so we're gonna just tie into a few of those, although maybe I'll add some of my light browns. There's just like a touch of these kind of interesting light browns. So we'll add just a couple over here. This is definitely not going to be a photocopy, but if I want to take a photo, I would use my camera. I love how sketches kind of distill it down to what you remember and the colors and the energy, as opposed to, you know, the exact details or just everything that a camera picks up. Okay, and I'm painting just a couple of those little fragments of kind of sun that was glinting off some of those rocks kind of super high up. We got just a couple up there, just like that. And then we're going to start working on those interesting kind of tree lines that were working their way up. So I've got a little bit of this blue, just to kind of make sure stuff is still flowing. And then I'm going to add in the purples and the indigo that kind of make that tree line up. They are green trees, but they didn't seem green at the time. So here we go, a little bit of this kind of purple, kind of working those little streaks, just like that. And then I almost feel like maybe I should have added this brown in, but we can still put that in later here. So add a little bit of this purple right like that, and then we're diving in with the indigo once this is kind of set. Over here too, I'm going to really go wild with the kind of darker colors behind, because I kind of want this mountain to sort of stand out. I remember that just being really, really bright and significant there. All right, there we go. A little bit of our purple. That's feeling pretty good. Now let's dive right in with that indigo. Here we go. Getting that nice and watery and good and flowy. And I'm just gonna let that water do its thing. What's so fun is like the things like the mud flats here, it's the same principles. Like the water looks like watercolor because it's the same stuff pulling on it. All the movement and way the sediments change. It's the same effects that are actually going on my page, just at a much bigger scale. So it's really fun to be able to paint these areas with watercolor especially. Okay, just a little bit of those kind of valley cornices that were going on there. Maybe a little bit up here. And then we'll kind of surround, we'll go right down. I might leave a tiny bit of a line where that ice and snow kind of is right on the edge. And then right up to the edge of our little peak here. I definitely could have done the peak first and then all of this second, but watercolor is all about kind of experimenting a little bit, and mistakes can often lead to some really fun results. All right, so there's a bit of this. Feeling pretty good about that. Definitely a little all over, but we're getting there here. And now let's add some of where these kind of rocks, these real bright rocks were in the sun. They're kind of that nice chestnut, burnt sienna color. Just like that. Trying not to have it bleed into the rest of the painting too much. But we're just moving real quick, so if it does, that's fine too. Okay, so we got a little bit there, a little bit here. And as soon as those are dry, we'll add the kind of darker shades right next to them. Okay, so there's that. Maybe add a few more little spots of color now that we know how this lower mud flat kind of turned out. Maybe there's a bit of purple that you need right here. Maybe a bit down here in this little mud flat area. But it's kind of revealing itself now as a painting. We're almost there. It's getting pretty close. Almost bringing it to life here. I might add in the sky now. We had kind of this nice mottled winter sky. I'm just gonna add a little bit of some water right up top. And then I'm gonna come in and kind of carve out the tops of these mountains with a little bit of indigo, letting it kind of bleed up into that sky, which will kind of work its way up. So there we go, a little bit right there. And then right down here, just like that. Now we'll try the same up here. A little bit down, up. It's so interesting that watercolor, unlike almost any other medium, you're really kind of carving out more than you are painting. It's almost like you're a sculptor with color. So just a little bit right there. And then we will call that a sky. Kind of brings those mountains out just a little bit more. Okay, so now it's time for the darkest part. You should always save whatever your highest bit of contrast is, because that's what people will see and notice. So I'm going to grab a little bit of this indigo right here, and I'm going to add that right to this edge, letting it move a little bit into some of that burnt sienna there. Trying to create that kind of texture of sun and rock. Just a little bit though. That's looking pretty good to me. All right, something like that. Same over here as well on this one. And now let's add in this little path here. This is where we came up. Now if I want to, I could put a little person there. I might do that. Sometimes it's kind of fun to paint yourself in for scale. So I might jump in here and just add a little tiny person. You can kind of just put a little head on a backpack and a pair of legs. does the trick. So just a little person right here. And now we'll just add a little bit of the shadow and call this a mountain. Just a tiny bit right here, coming down, kind of coming through. Sometimes too, what I like to do is I add a little bit of kind of just some splatter here. So I'm just grabbing a little bit of paint and I'm just gonna kind of flick it. Hope it works. There we go. That gives a little bit of texture. And then a little bit of this brown here, we'll do the same. It's like just enough randomness that it feels right. There we go. A little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit in there. And then I'm just gonna grab a slightly smaller brush because my control is not exactly surgery. I'm much more in the broad strokes kind of a deal. And let's just add a little bit right to the top. We'll make this person red so they stand out here. Just like that. And then just a tiny little bit more of a detail right here, right down below. And there we have our scene. Okay, now let's go see how this stacks up. And that's the way that I'm able to capture the way a place feels, not just how it looks.